An old man named Hannon Fuller is seen writing a letter for his closest apprentice, Douglas Hall. After finishing up, he leaves the letter with a trusted bartender named Ashton and tells him to hand it over to Douglas. However, right after Fuller departs, Ashton sneakily opens the letter and reads it. Meanwhile, Fuller returns home and lies down next to his wife. However, when he closes his eyes, he wakes up in the present-day Los Angeles of 1999. Now this is the real world. It is then revealed that the 1937 world is just a virtual reality simulation and Fuller is the creator of it. And despite being a simulated world, the characters there are oblivious that they are not real. In the next scene, Fuller, who has just woken up from the virtual world, then goes to a bar and uses the payphone to call Douglas. But the call is not answered. Soon a mysterious man appears and Fuller follows him outside. The two chat for a while, but shockingly, the man stabs Fuller with a knife and murders him. The next morning, Douglas wakes up and finds blood-stained clothes in his laundry buckets. He's confused about where it came from, but before he can investigate, he gets a call from Detective McBain of the LAPD and learns about his mentor Fuller's murder. The two then meet at Fuller's apartments. The detective mentions that Douglas has become the prime suspect in the murder, as he was the last person Fuller tried to contact before his death. Just then, the two encounter a young woman named Jane. She reveals that she is the only daughter of Mr. Fuller and has only returned from Paris after learning of her dad's death. Douglas goes to the lab. There, he talks with his co-worker Jason, and the latter reveals that Fuller was secretly testing the 1937 LA simulation. Douglas thought was months away from the first trial run. Afterward, Douglas returns home and goes through his audio messages. In one of them, an anxious Fuller tells him that he has found something incredible and that he has left a letter for him inside the 1937 simulation because he fears his death is imminent. Douglas then heads straight back to the lab and tells his colleague Jason about the message. He asks him about the characters Fuller interacted with last night and also reveals his desire to go into the simulation. Jason is naturally against this. However, Douglas is adamant about finding answers, as now even the police are starting to suspect him of being the murderer. Jason finally agrees to let him go into the system, but only for 2 hours. Shortly after, Douglas is sent back to 1937. Jason assigns him the role of a bank clerk named John Ferguson. At first, Douglas, who now possesses Ferguson, seems confused and tries to process everything that just happened. Then he takes a break from Ferguson's work and goes to meet Fuller's 1937 named Grierson. The two talk for a while, but surprisingly, Grierson asserts that he doesn't remember writing any letter to him. Here, it is revealed that once a person leaves the simulation, his or her double will immediately forget about the events that occurred while they were under control. But with that being said, Grierson admits that he has a clue, probably because he remembers some fragments of his memories. This leads Douglas to the bartender Jerry Ashton. Douglas inquires if Fuller left a message for him. The bartender feigns ignorance and denies receiving any messages. Hearing this, Douglas is puzzled and he suddenly begins to hallucinate. He quickly rushes to the bathroom, suffering from a seizure before collapsing on the ground. Back in 1999, warning signs go off and Jason terminates the connection and brings Douglas back. Jason explains that the unit started glitching because Douglas spent 2 hours inside the simulation, which is double the recommended time. After collecting himself, Douglas shares his experience inside the simulation and happily tells Jason that virtual reality very much works. Meanwhile, in the 1937 simulation, Ashton speaks with John Ferguson once he emerges from the washroom. However, Ferguson is puzzled about how he got to the hotel and doesn't recall having any conversation with Ashton. Back in 1999, a waiter named Tom Jones from the bar where Fuller was killed then shows up at the company. He speaks with Douglas privately and mentions that he saw the crime taking place. Jones reveals the killer is Douglas himself. He then demands a large ransom to keep his mouth shut about the murder. Douglas then attacks Jones with tremendous rage, prompting him to run away. Later, Douglas takes Jane out for dinner and tells her everything. It's clear that the two have started to like each other and the two start dancing. One thing leads to another and the two start making out. Following the romantic dinner, Douglas returns home, and later that night several police officers storm into his place and take him to the station on suspicion of the murder of Tom Jones. Detective McBain reveals that Jones came to the police and gave a statement claiming he saw Fuller leaving with Douglas on the night he was murdered. The evidence is enough to keep Douglas behind bars. But the very next morning Jane arrives at the station and bails him out. Searching for answers, Douglas goes straight to the lab and teleports his consciousness into John Ferguson's body in 1937. He then goes to meet Grierson. It's late at night and the old man doesn't want to talk, but Douglas promises to reveal why he sometimes wakes up in unknown places if he comes with him. Shortly after, the two go to the hotel and Grierson reveals that in the last 3 days, he's been having strange memory flashes where he finds himself at the hotel time and time again. Hearing this, Douglas pressures Grierson to recall if he gave someone a letter. After much effort, the old man finally remembers giving a letter to Ashton. However, before Douglas can make his way to the counter, Ashton runs away. Douglas chases him to the basement and eventually confronts him. Ashton pulls out a gun and demands to know what's going on. Douglas pretends to know nothing, but Ashton tells him that he noticed Douglas switching places with Ferguson. He also reveals that he read the letter left by Fuller. Ashton knows that he is an artificial creation and the world around them is not real. Following the instructions in the letter, Ashton drove to a place he would never go to. To his shock, after reaching a certain point, he found out that there was no life. It's simply a computer simulation. Douglas is puzzled as to why Fuller would write to him about the limitations of simulation because he already knows them. But before he can say anything, Ashton threatens to kill him for messing with people's minds and tries drowning him in a pool. Douglas fights for his life, and in the lab, his real self can also be seen convulsing. Luckily, Jason arrives and brings his friend back from the simulation. The incident shakes up Douglas and declares the project a mistake. He then announces his decision to shut it all down, much to the dismay of Jason. Following this, Douglas goes to meet Jane at her hotel, but learns that she has already checked out. Detective McBain, who has also come to meet Jane, approaches Douglas and reveals something shocking. He claims that according to his research, Fuller doesn't have a daughter. After a while, Douglas bribes the hotel driver to obtain the last address where he dropped the woman who claims to be Jane Fuller. There, directs Douglas to a woman named Natasha Molinaro, the cashier at a supermarket. Natasha turns out to be the simulation form of Jane Fuller, and she doesn't recognize Douglas or remember anything. With this, Douglas finally unravels the shocking truth that his world, the 1999 Los Angeles, is also another simulation. This is further confirmed when he drives to a place where he would never have considered going otherwise, the end of the world. He discovers that beyond a point, it's a computer simulation. Turns out that the letter that Fuller had left for Douglas was to explain that this world is also not real. Meanwhile, Detective McBain reaches Natasha and confronts her for lying about her identity, but as expected, she neither remembers him nor understands what he is saying. Panicking, Natasha's real-life user Jane Fuller downloads into her again and contacts Douglas. She asks to meet him, promising to reveal everything. Shortly after, when the two reunite, Jane gets straight to the point and explains that there are thousands of simulations, but this is the only one that managed to create a simulation within itself. The real world is actually in the year 2024, where she is the daughter of Fuller. She then reveals that it was indeed Douglas who killed the old man. However, she comforts him, saying that it's not his fault because he was being controlled by her real-life husband, David. Jane reveals that her husband was a decent man when she first fell in love with him, but as time passed by, something happened to him. At the lab, Jason gets curious about the simulation, so he downloads into Ashton's body. Unfortunately, he ends up getting killed by a car inside the 1937 simulation. Because of this, Ashton's consciousness takes control of Jason's body in the 1999 simulation. The bartender is mesmerized by the new environment, and his strange behavior prompts the security to alert Douglas, who is in bed with Jane. Douglas quickly gets dressed and rushes to the lab. Upon talking to Jason, he figures out that it's not his friend, but instead the bartender. He tries to talk to him, but Ashton holds him at gunpoint and demands answers from him. Left with no choice, Douglas reveals that they are not in the real world and that they are both simulations. Saying this, he takes Ashton to the computer lab. Although initially confused, Ashton starts liking the place and even puts his gun down to breathe in the fresh air. Suddenly, Jane's husband David, from the real world of 2024, takes control of Douglas and kills Ashton using his gun. He then finds his wife at Douglas's apartments. Jealous, he attempts to murder her. However, before he can do anything, Detective McBain arrives at the scene and shoots him dead. It appears the detective has also realized that they are in a simulation. Before parting ways, he requests Jane to leave them alone once she goes back to the real world. The scene then cuts to the real world. It's the year 2024. David's death in the 1999 simulation allows Douglas to take over David's body in the real world. He's shocked to wake up in a huge mansion where he finally reunites with Jane. She takes him to the balcony to show him the high-tech world of 2024. However, the surprises don't end there, as Fuller turns out to be alive and well in this real world. The film ends with the real world shrinking to a digital line of imagery, which may hint that this world is also another simulation.